I'm not usually that into artsy games. I'd usually rather play something that provides some fast and quick, key-jingling fun rather than something that is extremely cryptic and open to interpretation. However, after recently playing some of the Resident Evil remakes, I really wanted to sink my teeth into more of the survival horror genre. I saw a lot of buzz for Signalis around its release in October 2022, with it receiving glowing praise from many as a masterpiece of survival horror, and a throwback to classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill. So, naturally, I waited almost half a year to play the game. And holy shit, this game is good. Signalis begins simple enough. You play as a land survey/ship technician replica, or Elster, aboard the Penrose 512. You, along with a Gestalt partner, are part of a program tasked with scouting distant celestial bodies for either habitable conditions or natural resources. If you've played Nier, the terminology is sort of similar. Gestalts are humans, replicas are artificial humans. Anywho, you wake up on the crash-landed Penrose and your white-haired Gestalt partner, Ariane Young, is nowhere to be found. The only thing you have to go on is a faded picture, so you take a spacesuit and venture out in search of her. A few questionable decisions later, and you are left with a striking opening and a simple instruction. Remember our promise. A straightforward enough premise and hook, right? Find the person in the photo, go get milkshakes. Well, I am happy to say that it only gets more and more cryptic and confusing from here. After the title drop, Chapter 1 starts in a bathroom inside a facility called Sierpinski an unspecified amount of time in the future. Or maybe the past? Is this even literal? I don't know. Oh, the fellow your Gestalt partner? It's a different person now. Game doesn't draw attention to it, just happens. It does not take very long for it to become clear that there is something very, very wrong with Sierpinski. What with the dead bodies, propaganda, explicit warnings to leave immediately, no longer dead bodies. But god damn it, nothing is going to stand between me and milkshakes, so it's time to remind the residents that some rights shall not be infringed. The primary gameplay loop of Signalis is the usual survival horror fanfare. You explore increasingly difficult areas, surviving by managing supplies and dealing with enemies while you search for ways to progress. You can collect a large variety of items to this end, like different weapons, ammo, and healing items. But, like its contemporaries, you also need to collect a whole lot of keys and key items. These let you open various doors and solve various puzzles. One of Signalis' greatest challenges comes from this management of your very limited inventory space. You have to venture out from safe rooms and go collect supplies and key items, open doors, solve puzzles, make it back, store what you don't need, rinse repeat until you complete the area. If you die, you go back to your last save, which keeps the tension high and makes you come to appreciate the creepy red save monitor. Is that a threat? Combat in this game is pretty basic. When you aim, you plant your feet and your movement speed is greatly reduced. While aiming at an enemy, a little red box will appear on them. The longer you aim at an enemy, the tighter it becomes, and the more damage you do. After you hit an enemy a couple times, they might fall down and start writhing around, at which point you can introduce them to your shoe. That's basically it. Simple, but effective. There are a total of 6 primary weapons that you can obtain over the course of a playthrough, each filling slightly different niches. For example, you have the pistol, which does not crowd control well, but has reliable damage against single enemies. You also have the shotgun, which does a shit ton of damage if enemies get close, and can easily hit enemies that are bunched together. On the more unique side of weapons, you have the flare gun, which can either light single enemies on fire, or clear out the entire goddamn room. However, in addition to your primary weapon, you can also equip a sub-weapon or equipment. These include things like the stun prod, which will instantly knock down any enemy you hit with it, or you can also equip auto-injectors, which will automatically heal you if you are about to die. More importantly, you can equip flares, because enemies will not permanently die unless you burn their bodies. This is another crux of the resource management in Signalis. Killing an enemy is not a permanent solution unless you set them on fire, either with flares or the flare gun. This makes each encounter with enemies that much more calculated. It may not always be worth it to kill every enemy you come across. Additionally, as the game progresses, enemies become harder to kill. Some have more health, do more damage, and some even have shields or armor. So, it may be more practical to run around some enemies or to use stealth to bypass them. There is not always a cut and dry solution to every room, and whenever you do choose to fight, you'll want to do it in the thriftiest way possible. You can try to line up enemies with weapons like the shotgun or the rifle in order to over-penetrate and save ammo. Or you could wait for enemies to group up and get close so you can hit multiple with a single stun prod. However, because of the limited inventory space, it is very unlikely that you will come into each encounter extremely well prepared, so you'll usually need to improvise. If you want to be able to pick up all the important items you'll find on any given trip, you can really only afford to bring 1, maybe 2 items with you when you leave a safe room, including the flashlight. This might be one of my only real complaints with the game, that being just how limited your inventory is. Having only 6 items for everything is criminally low. It's not really a problem when it comes to guns, ammo, and healing items, because you can usually make do with very limited resources, but it becomes especially apparent with the key items. A couple of areas dump so many key items on you that it just ends up requiring you to make a ton of trips back and forth to the item box just to drop them off. I felt this especially with the plates, dolls, and rings in Nowhere. I do understand that some people really enjoy inventory management taken to the absolute extreme. I just find it a little bit tedious since I'm used to survival horror games with much more forgiving inventory management. Probably 1 or 2 extra slots would make things go a little bit smoother, or maybe if just your equipped weapon or flashlight didn't take up an inventory slot. Not everything in Signalis is inventory management in a law enforcement roleplay, however. Another major aspect of gameplay is puzzle solving. Each area in the game has a handful of puzzles that could be as simple as flipping a picture over or taping a broken keycard together, or as involved as basic arithmetic. Generally speaking, I can say that the puzzles in Signalis are very fun to figure out. The majority of the puzzles are, at the very least, fun brain teasers that require a little bit of thinking or problem solving. On the other end of the spectrum, some of the puzzles make me think I'm fucking stupid. One of Signalis' coolest puzzle solving mechanics is the radio. The radio allows you to tune into a wide range of frequencies, which can be used to receive information from certain signals, or allows you to play certain signals out loud into a mic. On the more batshit side of things, the radio also lets you translate some of the signals into real-life goddamn images. But those are really only for the secret ending. The radio does also play a minor role in combat, as the Colibri enemies can be defeated by tuning into displayed frequencies. Or you could just shoot them once, but I digress. Not only is Signalis really engaging and fun to play, but it also looks really damn good. Cutscenes feature full pixel art in between artistically edited visuals and music. Environments look really sharp. The lighting especially looks really nice, since every object in the environment is a 3D model. They all cast their own shadows from light sources in the room, your flashlight, or even muzzle flashes from gunfire. The game in general has a low-poly PS1 sci-fi meets anime art style. It's the Alien kind of sci-fi, where everything is obviously more technologically advanced than what we have in the modern day, but at the same time, the computers and monitors appear very dated. It's like sci-fi if we never left the 20th century. The UI and menus in particular look and sound really cool with the attention to this stylization. For most of the game, this is what you're working with. However, as the game progresses and the setting becomes more and more distorted, there are huge homages to Silent Hill. Some areas are metallic, rusted nightmares where everything looks like a cage or a torture device. The enemies especially look like something straight out of Silent Hill. Every enemy looks like they at some point used to be human, however, they are distorted, twisted, and bloodied in increasingly drastic ways. The corrupted Yules, for example, appear distorted, but for the most part human. The corrupted Storches, on the other hand, look barely human anymore, with giant beak-like appendages that make them perhaps the most visually disturbing enemies in the game. The audio in this game is also well done. The game's atmosphere is masterfully crafted by its audio design. When you're out of combat, there's almost no sound outside of your own footsteps or the sound of you navigating your own inventory. The relative silence is occasionally broken by something like the opening of a door, whose opening and subsequent slamming shut is loud and unnerving as you wait to see what's on the other side. Once a fight breaks out, the sound comes rushing back in. Weapons sound punchy and satisfying. Enemies have high-pitched, distorted screeches when they both spot you and when you stomp the life out of them. Then, after each encounter, the sound slowly retreats, and again, you're back to that oppressive silence. I want to draw particular attention to the game's soundtrack, which features a wide selection of tracks that evoke many different emotions. The game features creepy and droning atmospheric tracks that you would expect of a horror game, as well as more bombastic, metallic-sounding tracks for combat encounters and boss fights. On the other hand, the game also features some beautiful piano-centric tracks with classical motifs from the likes of Frédéric Chopin for the game's slower, more melancholy moments and cutscenes. I know I've talked about some specific gameplay scenarios and puzzles, but if this game seems interesting, I implore you to go play it for yourself before I talk about the story. Being able to piece the story together, figure things out, and come to your own conclusion is way more fun with a game like this. And it's $20, so come on. So, shortly after you arrive at Sierpinski, you are told that all of the Gestalt workers in the facility were sent down into the mines below. Unfortunately, getting down there isn't going to be so easy, as a mysterious illness has infected most of the Gestalts and replicas in the facility. This illness results in the death of Gestalts, reducing them to silhouette stains on the floor, while infected replicas lose their humanity and become zombie-adjacent monsters. On your way down, you encounter a Gestalt named Issa too, who is looking for her sister, Erica. You also encounter a replica, Adler, who is the administrator of the facility and obviously knows something you don't, or at least something you've forgotten.
¿Estás eine Bedrohung?
It becomes clear that you are not the first Elster who has come to Sierpinski looking for their Gestalt partner, who, as far as you are aware, is Alina Suh. Additionally, over the course of the game, you view multiple memory and/or dream sequences. Some of these are from Issa's point of view and prominently feature a white-haired girl being bullied or sitting alone on a train. She's apparently a social outcast of sorts. These sequences are obviously important, and the girl resembles the one from your photo. Not that photo. That photo. Some of the sequences are much more abstract and cryptic, and appear to be more so dreams than actual memories. Once you make your way down through Sierpinski all the way into the mines, you are shown a scene of Issa fighting Adler, stabbing him in the eye and pushing him somewhere unknown. After a short trip through the mines, you arrive at the same place where Issa presumably went and where Adler fell, and so you take the plunge. You land quite literally nowhere. This area is a complete nightmare, both in its design and its gameplay. It is the most distorted of any area in the game. You don't have a map, rooms don't connect to each other how they should, and masses of flesh intertwine with its cage-like appearance. After meeting up with Issa once again, you climb back out of the hole you entered at the start of the game and come face to face with Adler. He talks vaguely about an inability to move on and being here before. This, along with some of the visuals of the following scene, reiterate the apparently cyclical nature of Signalis. As Elster walks through an endless red wasteland, you are bombarded with versions of the painting Isle of the Dead and what appear to be fragments of Elster's Gestalt memories. Eventually, Elster arrives back at the crashed Penrose 512, where she loses an arm unsuccessfully opening the hatch before tumbling off the hull. The life fades from Elster's eyes as the credits roll. Now is as good a time as any to talk about the greater setting of Signalis. The game takes place in a completely colonized solar system controlled by two political factions. First is the Yusan Empire, a heavily religious state founded by the Grand Empress which appears to be in a general state of decline and is a shell of its former self. The other, and more significant to the game's story, is the Yusan Nation, which is at war with the Yusan Empire. The Yusan Nation is a totalitarian, Orwellian regime that takes heavy inspiration from the Eastern German Republic. The nation rules through the repression of individuality, the deconstruction of personal freedoms, thought control, mandatory military service, and extensive propaganda. All in-game locations are on planets that the nation controls, so their influence and propaganda can be seen everywhere. Under the nation's regime, interest in the arts and other displays of individuality are looked down upon, and dissenters from the political ideology of the state are sent to facilities like Sierpinski for re-education and forced labor. Even the game's limit of 6 inventory slots is an example of the Yusan nation's influence. Since private property is a privilege, individuals are supposed to keep their pockets empty and their bags light. After completing Unknown, you are returned to the title screen. However, the game is not yet over. The Continue option has been replaced with Begin, and by doing so you are placed back at the beginning of the game, with Elster once again being awakened aboard the Penrose. However, this time the Penrose isn't crash-landed. Here you play as the original Elster 512, and you go about your routine maintenance of the Penrose before going to meet your Gestalt officer, Ariane Young, not Alina Suh. This is the white-haired girl from the photo at the beginning who you were actually looking for. As someone who had a particular interest in painting, music, movies, and other things banned by the Yusan nation, Ariane was relentlessly bullied during her time at school. A complete outcast, she joined the Penrose program after graduating so that she would not be sent to Sierpinski, presumably for re-education and to be conscribed into forced labor. She joined the program so that she could be herself. Over the course of their time together as a part of the Penrose program, Elster and Ariane fall in love. Out in the far, unknown reaches of space, within the cramped confines of the ship, the only thing they have is each other. After this nice and heartwarming memory sequence concludes, you are back to playing as the Elster from the not-so-nice and heartwarming rest of the game. Though some things have become clearer, you are once again asked to remember our promise. So, after repossessing an arm and some armor from yourself, you set off one last time. This final area is Rotfront, which is a completely different planet from the rest of the game, as Sierpinski was located on a planet called Leng. This area contains distorted and bastardized memories of Ariane and Issa's time here, with both the photo store where Ariane worked part-time and the bookstore owned by the E2s, and continually falls apart as you collect the items you need to progress. This is where you have your final encounter with Issa. As you find her in the bookstore, she despairs about not being able to find her sister before she succumbs to the illness and dies. At the end of Rotfront, it's time to go home. You wind up in Ariane's room from the very beginning of the game and are given one last chance to prepare before the final boss fight. Side note, this is also where you find a note that explains how Ariane and Alina look so similar that they could have been sisters, which is supposed to explain why you may not have noticed the picture changing and had them confused. The final boss fight is against the commander replica of Sierpinski, Falk, who has become similarly infected of the illness and greatly distorted. More importantly, she has also inherited Elster's happy memories of Ariane, and so they fight in order to decide which of them is the true Elster. After triumphing over Falk, Elster is once again faced with Adler, who has become greatly disfigured by the illness. In an effort to keep her promise, and in an effort to prevent Elster from breaking the cycle, the pair mortally wound each other. Elster once again arrives at the Penrose 512, home, this time successfully making her way inside. As you walk through the remains of the Penrose one last time, everything begins to become clear. When a Penrose expedition reaches 3,000 cycles, or days, without finding any suitable planets, it is considered a failure. On unsuccessful Penrose expeditions, the natural course is the inevitable death of both the Gestalt officer and replica, either through the complete depletion of rations or the leaking of radiation out of the ship's reactor. The options left at this point are for the Gestalt to face a slow, agonizing death through starvation or radiation poisoning, or take a permanent rest in the ship's cryogenic pod. Alternatively, they could have the replica kill them in an act of mercy. Both Ariane and Elster lived on until around 6,500 cycles, long past the Penrose expectation, determined to continue living for each other. No matter how long they held out, though, their fate was still the same, and this was where they made their promise. Ariane became very sick due to radiation poisoning and wanted Elster to kill her when the sickness progressed too far and became completely unbearable. It is unclear what the exact reason for this promise going unfulfilled was, whether it was Elster not wanting to go through with it out of her love for Ariane, or because she herself became sick or reached the end of her operational lifetime. As a result, Elster units have continually inherited the memories of Elster 512 and created an endless cycle of the promise going unfulfilled. And this is where the 3 main endings of Signalis diverge, with which one you receive being determined by various aspects of your playstyle, like how many enemies you killed, how many times you died, or how quickly you completed the game, to name a few. The memory ending has Elster arrive at cryogenics aboard the Penrose. However, Ariane no longer remembers her or their promise, and so Elster succumbs to her wound and dies next to Ariane, once again leaving the promise unfulfilled. In the promise ending, Ariane does in fact remember Elster and their promise and begs Elster to finally put her out of her misery and let it end. Elster reluctantly agrees and strangles Ariane to death before succumbing to her own wound and dying as well. These are definitely the two most satisfying endings the game has to offer. The other, the leave ending, has Elster not even muster up the courage to make it inside the Penrose before wandering off and dying alone in the wasteland. And so that is the story of Signalis. I think. The story is largely open to interpretation and theorizing. I didn't even touch on things like bioresonance and whatever greater power is at play with the Red Gate. It is extremely unclear what is literal or not and what certain things mean. It's also unclear if the Ariane at the end of the game even is Ariane, since notes from Alina imply that her resonating with Ariane is causing her to almost become Ariane. It's weird, but I'm satisfied with the way that I understand the story as it was presented. This game is just so fucking sad, man. I wouldn't even describe it as particularly scary. The game is just so goddamn sad, depressing, stressful, and psychologically taxing to play. None of the characters you meet get a happy ending, except for maybe the star at the beginning of the game, lucky her. My first playthrough took me just over 6 hours and I got the memory ending, mainly because I played the game turbo conservative with my ammo and made a point to simply run around as many enemies as I could. And just like, I don't think I've ever been in a weirder limbo of being on the verge of tears and having an existential meltdown than when I was slowly coming to the realization of what was going on the Penrose. Reading the notes, finding the original Elster's body, and coming face to face with Ariane was just so fucking much. It is just such a downer of a game and so oppressively sad, but at the same time, it is so engrossing. Ariane and Elster's story is tragically beautiful. Because Ariane couldn't be herself under the regime of a nation that saw her as disposable, she decided to leave everything behind to be flung beyond the solar system with a single other person just so that she could find any happiness. Even though the Penrose 512 became a prison that she couldn't leave for the rest of her life, where she became intimately familiar with every single nut and bolt on board, her love for Elster and her ability to just be herself made her more alive than any of her time on Langer Rotfront. I want to end this video with one of Ariane's notes that I think perfectly encapsulates the beauty of her and Elster's tragedy, that, despite their love for each other, they are consigned to an unavoidable, tragic fate. Cycle 5309. I'm tired of it all. Every time I go to sleep, I wonder if I'll wake up again. I'm scared that it will be the last time I say goodnight to her. Did I say it right? Will she be okay? What if one of us just won't wake up tomorrow? Cycle 5434. I don't want to die. I don't want to live anymore either. Everything is just so exhausting. I just want to lie down and disappear. Actually, you know what? Saddest thing in this game was what happened to the Yules. They were just trying to vibe and have a party, and a fucking Storch comes over and stabs the shit out of their music player, probably causing them all to undergo persona degradation and go insane. Fuck that Storch. Asshole.